Welcome everyone to another edition of the Classic Comic Archive, a series where I recap and review many of Marvel Comics' most seminal early issues. Our story for today is Fantastic Four 2, cover dated January of 1962. This issue marks the first appearance of the evil alien race the Skrulls and was written by Stan Lee and drawn by Jack Kirby. Our story begins as the Thing is mysteriously swimming towards an offshore tower. The sight is made somewhat ominous when you consider that it's miles away from shore and that the Thing is completely alone. Yet he's come to it for a reason, and quite a sinister one, as it's then that we see him dive underneath the tower and destroy one of its supports. As expected, the tower then crumbles into the sea. Luckily its crew are all able to escape on lifeboats, but are left baffled at how such a mighty structure could so suddenly collapse. Yet they don't have to wonder long, as it's then that they notice the Thing swimming away and rightfully blame him for the disaster. But the issue then shifts focus to the invisible girl Sue Storm, who's inspecting an expensive diamond at one of the country's most lavish stores. Under normal circumstances the jeweler would never publicly showcase the gem, but apparently the Fantastic Four have become celebrities since the last issue, and thus he makes an exception in gratitude for all that she's done as a hero. Sue reciprocates the gesture by brazenly stealing the diamond and then turning invisible to mask and escape. The store's guards are helpless to stop her, but the issue doesn't linger on the crime for much longer, as it then shifts focus to the public unveiling of a grand marble monument in the Midwest. Apparently it had taken 5 painstaking years to craft, yet it only takes a few seconds to be destroyed, as Johnny Storm, aka the Human Torch, appears out of nowhere and wickedly flies past it. The heat he produces completely melts it, yet no one is able to stop him as he cheerfully flies away. Thus the pattern continues as the issue shifts focus to the last member of the Fantastic Four, its leader Reed Richards, otherwise known as Mr. Fantastic. He uses his incredible stretching ability to slink his arm into the open window of a power plant and then switch a lever that shuts down electricity to the entirety of Central City, California. But at this point it's obvious that something is afoot with the usually heroic Fantastic Four. And sure enough it is, as the issue shifts forward sometime later as all 4 members are gathered together. They seem to be proud of their evil deeds, and even take the time to explain to one another how they'd done them. The Thing is the first up, yet he oddly reveals that he had not used his super strength to destroy the tower, but a hidden detonator that is seemingly embedded in his skin. But it gets even stranger as Sue reveals that she had not gone invisible to escape the jewelry store, but had only shrunk down like Ant-Man to make it seem as though she had. Then Johnny reveals that he had not used his innate flame powers to melt the monument, but was wearing an anti-gravity harness and had activated a hidden thermal bomb. For once, Mr. Fantastic actually had used his stretching powers, but only because the ability is native to his alien race, as he and his teammates are actually shape-shifting Skrull imposters. They're planning an invasion of Earth, but the actual Fantastic Four are the only ones powerful enough to potentially stop them. Thus they've purposefully turned humanity against a team, so it'll destroy them and pave the way for an obstacle-free invasion. While a rather eccentric plan, it seems to be working, as the next day's papers declare the 4 public enemies with government orders to be killed. At this point you might be wondering where the actual Fantastic Four are. Well, it turns out that they were away on an isolated hunting trip. They've only now learned of their strange situation and begin wondering what they should do about it. While Reed remains level-headed and tries to think up a solution, the Thing doesn't take the news as well and furiously hurls a decoration out of the window while declaring that if the world thinks he's a menace, then he'll be a one. In truth, this outburst is really just a reflection of the turmoil bubbling within the former Ben Grimm, as he now has to wrestle with the monster he's become. Reed tries to calm his friend down, but the Thing isn't having it and declares that he's going outside to blow off some steam. Johnny and Sue worry that he's going to wreak havoc, but Reed thinks it's best that they let him go, as they can't blame him for the position he's in. To his credit, Reed then accepts it, as he admits that it was his hubris that led to their exposure to the mutagenic cosmic rays. So the Storm siblings drop the issue, allowing the Thing to leave in peace. Yet he doesn't have the chance, at least willingly, as it's then that a unit of soldiers emerge from the wilderness and surround the Four's cabin. They announce their presence through a loudspeaker and order the team to come out with their hands in the air. The 4 dutifully obey the command, except for the Thing, who spitefully keeps his arms down. But in any case, the issue then shifts forward as the team have arrived at a federal prison and are being escorted to their own private cells. They've been crafted to negate each member's specific power, except for Sue, who's seemingly in a normal cell. But Johnny's not, as his is lined with asbestos, a flame-resistant material. Yet the crafty teenager knows that there must be an air vent somewhere, one that he can use to burst into flames. Thus he begins ripping up the floor to find it, which he does almost immediately. But the issue then shifts focus to the Thing, who's been placed in a cell lined with thick steel. Thus it becomes obvious that the prison hasn't dealt much with superheroes before, as no measly steel can hold someone as strong as the Thing. But before we can see any more of him, the issue shifts focus to Reed, whose cell is completely empty, as the prison fears that he can turn any object into a deadly weapon. But he doesn't need any weapons to escape, as he simply begins probing every inch of his cell with his especially sensitive fingers, searching for any imperfections that he can stretch through. But once again the issue shifts focus, this time back to Sue, who's being served dinner by some guards. But they make the mistake of opening her cell, as she simply turns invisible and slips past them, although they can tell she's escaped and thus sound an alarm. The guards then try to pursue her, but are quickly overwhelmed as Johnny melts his cell, the Thing crashes through, and Reed stretches out. The four then reunite outside and commandeer a dormant helicopter to fully escape. They then flee to one of apparently many secret hideouts, where Reed decides that their best course of action is to set up a trap for their imposters. Johnny agrees and then pulls out the day's paper. Its headline reveals that an experimental rocket is soon to be launched. He wonders if he can pretend to sabotage it and thus trick an imposter into thinking that he's one of them. In the ensuing confusion he can hopefully lure it out. None of his teammates object to the plan, and so Johnny readies to leave right away. But a still irate Thing stops him, as he wants to be the one to lure out the imposter. But Johnny doesn't care what he wants, and flames on anyways. This brash act provokes the Thing into nearly attacking him, but luckily Reed and Sue step in to stop the would-be brawl. The latter tries to reason with the Thing, but takes a more sympathetic approach. She recognizes his right to be bitter, but implores him to reel in his anger, as sooner or later he's going to provoke a confrontation that'll destroy them all. For once he actually listens, calms down, and then lets Johnny leave to enact his plan. So the issue shifts focus to the rocket's launch site. Everything's ready to go as the Human Torch appears out of nowhere. He doesn't head for the rocket itself, but instead destroys a separate but unfinished launching platform. Of course the site's guards don't care what he destroys, as either way he's a threat, and they thus open fire. But the Torch is too fast for them, and escapes into a waiting car with Sue and Reed. But he's not sure if they're his actual teammates, so he slyly remarks that if he didn't know any better he'd have thought that they were the real pair. Thus an imposter takes the bait, as it replies that he really shouldn't be surprised that their shape-shifting abilities are so good. Despite his rather obvious trickery, neither of the two imposters realize that Johnny is not one of them, and so they cluelessly take him to their headquarters. But it's there that another one does, and thus orders him to be slain, lest he reveal their secret. Yet before they get the chance, Johnny pulls out a flare gun and shoots a message out of a nearby window. It's nothing more than a number 4, but a clear signal to his teammates that he needs their help. But as he waits for them to arrive he traps the 3 Skrulls within a ring of fire. Yet there was also a 4th, the one who was impersonating him. This imposter mechanically duplicates the Torch's power and purposefully flies right into him. The collision somehow dampens Johnny's flame, giving the Skrulls enough time to destroy him. But it's then that the Thing suddenly crashes through a nearby wall. He begins battling the Skrulls, but one remains focused on Johnny and pulls out a blaster to fire at him. Yet before he can, Reed arrives through an open window and stretches out his hand to disarm the alien. It's also then that Sue arrives, as she turns invisible and trips a Skrull that had been fleeing. Apparently this was the last of the Skrulls to be defeated, as we next see the 4 of them tied up and being interrogated by Reed. But they refuse to talk, provoking a furious Thing into nearly crushing them with a nearby desk. But Reed intervenes and holds back his teammate for a few moments, giving the Skrulls time to decide if they'd rather talk or surely be destroyed by an enraged Thing. They choose the former and desperately reveal their plan. Thus the Fantastic Four realize that even though they've defeated their imposters, they still have to deal with a Skrull invasion force waiting for a signal to attack. Johnny questions how they'll defeat an entire army of Skrulls, but Reed tells him that they don't have to, for just as the aliens can impersonate them, so too can they impersonate the aliens. The issue then shifts forward a few minutes later, as the Fantastic Four are climbing onto the roof of the Skrulls' hidden headquarters. Atop it is what seems to be an ordinary water tower, but is actually a disguised spaceship. The four board the craft and are flown to the aliens' mothership orbiting Earth. Inside they're met by a Skrull commander, who assumes them to be his soldiers still impersonating the Fantastic Four. He asks if the invasion is ready, but Reed decries that it's not, nor will it ever be, as Earth's defenses are too strong. For proof, he hands the commander an envelope containing photographs of horrifying monsters. Reed claims that they're Earth's greatest warriors, although in actuality they're just images clipped out of strange tales and Journey into Mystery comic books. But they fool the commander nonetheless, as he calls off the invasion and tells the four to return to normal and leave with him. But Reed refuses, as he claims that he and his team must remain on Earth to erase all evidence of their presence, even if it means they'll be destroyed. Thus the grateful commander then hands Reed an esteemed medal for his team's seeming sacrifice, and sees them off as they return to Earth. But as they do, they happen to stumble into the same band of cosmic radiation that had first given them their powers. The Thing is terrified to pass through it again, as he fears that it'll transform him into an even more gruesome monster. Sure enough, its mutagenic force begins dramatically warping his body, but amazingly back into the form of Ben Grimm. Yet before we can see the totality of this transformation, the team's ship lands and they disembark. But as soon as they're outside, they're suddenly blinded by a barrage of floodlights. They've been surrounded by the police, who have come to rearrest them. Reed tries to explain that they've been framed, but is silenced by a captain intent on bringing them in. An angry Thing then snaps at the officer and threatens to crush all of his men single-handedly. But the captain is hardly intimidated, as it's then that the Thing realizes he's back to being a normal man. The news is elating, as he can finally live an ordinary life again, free from the terror his monstrous appearance brings. But somewhat tragically, this relief is only temporary, as moments later his body begins to warp back into that of the Thing. Surprisingly, Ben isn't angry about it, but only because his rage has been consumed by a feeling of hopeless dread. Sue tries to cheer him up by pointing out that they don't understand the nature of his transformation, and thus he might one day fully return to normal. But at this point the police captain has had enough of the Fantastic Four and orders his men to arrest them. In a last-ditch attempt to save themselves and perhaps the human race, Reed implores the captain to take them to his apartment, where he claims that everything will be explained. The captain agrees, and we next see the four as they're being transported by motorcade to the apartment. On the drive there, Reed tries to explain that they've been framed by shape-shifting aliens, but of course the captain thinks he's lying. Yet he learns the truth soon enough, for as soon as his men arrive at the apartment, they're suddenly attacked by a giant serpent. The Thing rushes in and tackles the beast, but only for a massive spiky monster to appear next. The police open fire on it, but its hide is completely bulletproof. Only Johnny's able to defeat it, as he bursts into flames and produces an intense heat that drives the monster back. But the issue then shifts focus to Reed, who notices a bird flying out of the apartment's window. He realizes that it's the last shape-shifting Skrull, and thus stretches his body out to snatch it in midair. Moments later, all three imposters have been rounded up and have assumed their alien appearances. It should be noted that there was originally 4 Skrulls in this issue, but Reed explains that the 4th had returned to his homeworld with the rest of the invasion force. Regardless, the sight of the 3 gathered is enough to convince the captain of the Fantastic Four's innocence. Thus he thanks them for foiling the invasion, but wonders what'll come of the 3 captured Skrulls, as he fears that no prison can hold them. But Reed already has a plan for this, and asks the captain for permission to deal with the Skrulls his own way. The grateful officer agrees, and quickly leaves with his motorcade to inform the public of the Fantastic Four's innocence. Thus it's just them and the Skrulls, who at this point fully expect to be executed. But Reed has other plans, as he tells the aliens that they'll have to transform into whatever he wants, at which point he'll erase their memories of being Skrulls. They agree, and the issue subsequently ends as we see that they've become a trio of grazing cows, completely unaware of their true alien nature. That concludes Fantastic Four 2 and another episode of the Classic Comic Archive. But as always, I would like to offer a brief review of this issue. Overall, I thought that this was a great story, perhaps even better than the first. It managed to expand on each character's personality while also developing the team's dysfunctional dynamic. But the Thing was the standout of the issue, as I've never seen an early Marvel character who so vehemently despises their own power. At least someone like Spider-Man, who routinely struggles with balancing his hero and civilian identities, even has the option to switch back and forth. But the Thing has essentially been cursed with a monstrous appearance, and no matter how many heroic deeds he does, he'll always be an outcast for it. Or at least that's the way he sees it. It's an interesting dynamic, and one that I'm glad is being given plenty of time to explore. As for the villains of this issue, well, the Skrulls were certainly not as compelling as Mole Man, but they were honestly more exciting and a lot more menacing, and I'm thus excited to see them make further appearances in this series and others. But in any case, let me know what you thought of this issue and the video, and feel free to suggest other classic comics for me to cover. Thanks for watching.